We're still digesting the news that broke yesterday that Donald Trump received a target letter from the special counsel Jack Smith in his criminal probe into efforts to steal the 2020 election. That means that Trump has officially been put on notice that he may be indicted for the second time by the Department of Justice. NBC News has confirmed that the target letter referenced 3 criminal statutes that the ex-president may be charged with violating. Those include the conspiracy to defraud the United States, deprivation of rights under color of law, and tampering with a witness. I should note that the last statute, tampering with a witness, includes a broad range of instances. One is obstructing any official proceeding. We've seen that statute in several of the DOJ's January 6th cases. Danya Perry served as deputy chief of the criminal division for the United States Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York and as deputy attorney general for the state of New York. Charles Coleman is a civil rights attorney who served as the prosecutor in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. Both join me now. Good evening. Thank you both for being here. This witness tampering one was interesting because I didn't understand what that meant until I read a little into it and realized that this doing something that interferes in a proceeding is tied to that. Correct. It's a broad statute, and there are many subdivisions. One of them could be witness tampering, and one could be obstructing an official proceeding. Arguably, according to reporting that we've all read and heard, it could be either of those, right? We've heard with the January 6th committee hearings, there were witnesses who testified that they had, in fact, been potentially tampered with. And then certainly a lot of the, at least public discourse, has surrounded various iterations of schemes to obstruct with an official proceeding, i.e. the counting of the electoral votes on January 6th in Congress. So we don't know. Right. All we know is, you know, one of the subdivisions of the statute, but such are the events of January 6th that it could be from column A, it could be from column B. Well, what we know from the last indictment that Jack Smith provided is that he makes a good indictment. Like, he likes you to be able to read it and understand it. This issue here is taking something that we have volumes of information about, right, literally millions of pages of information, and making it into something very digestible. That seems to be a prosecutor's work. Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because as we were having this conversation, the number one thing that I kept thinking about was we should all expect another speaking indictment. Right. We don't always get those, but clearly that's an area that Jack Smith excels in and how he wants to do things. And I think it's going to be very enlightening with respect to everything that's been garnered throughout the course of this investigation, to put it all together so people can stop speculating about what's happening here and what's happening there. I've said consistently throughout this entire ordeal, we've had more insight into this investigation than most people typically have because of the investigative reporting that's been done, because we're talking about a former president of the United States of America. Usually prosecutors are able to build their cases privately, outside of the view of, you know, the news and reporters and everyone else trying to get information. And so these indictments are going to be very, very telling whenever they do come, if they do come, because what they're going to do is create a narrative. It is one step in the process of creating a narrative that you ultimately want to sell to the jury, and you want to make it as straightforward and also as informative as possible without compromising your case in a way that can be damaging. But Danya, this is only part of it, right? All of this research, all of the evidence gathering, all the way to the indictment is, I don't know, half the race. He still has to make this case in front of a jury. It seems obvious, I'm sure, to some people that this is a slam-dunk case, but there really aren't slam-dunk cases. There's no such thing when you've got a jury. And particularly when we have such a fractured society, all you need is one juror to hang the rest of them. Or to believe the rhetoric that this is a witch hunt, or this is an unfair prosecution, or this is a politicized prosecution. Is that something you've had to deal with in your prosecutions? No, not really. And there never has been anything quite like this. Right. This is what we call in the law sui generis, right? It's its own thing, and there is nothing like it. I want to go back to the notion of it being a slam dunk. Even though this is a federal prosecution and we know that the feds generally have a 95+ percentile in terms of their conviction rate, there's no such thing with respect to this because it's uncharted territory. Right. But here's the important thing. It may not be a slam dunk, but it doesn't have to be in this particular situation, because you've got so many other bites at the apple with respect to Donald Trump and his just criminal activity or alleged criminal activity, that you don't necessarily have to put all your eggs in one basket. Now, if I'm Jack Smith, I understand that. This is his basket, but he's also carefully calculated
what are the strongest baskets, which is why you see a very unique set of charges in terms of this potential target letter that people are talking about, because he's already understood, yes, I may have multiple opportunities, but I have to make the most out of each one of the opportunities that I have.
Now, regardless of how big and how high profile the case is, when you're prosecuting a case, you'd have to assume that the defense is going to be looking for every opportunity to have this thing thrown out or taken out on appeal. In this particular case, that impulse has got to be even greater for Jack Smith. What's he got to do, or what's he got to be thinking about to make sure that he doesn't misstep on this one? Because literally any misstep here could cost him the case.
A couple co-authors and I wrote a 250-page prosecution memo that came out last week, in which we tried to do what we are imagining the Department of Justice and the Special Counsel's Office, more to the point, have been doing, which is anticipating every possible line of defense and rebutting it, or at least trying to test it and see how far it goes, how strong it is. And there's no question, frankly, I don't think there are that many very strong defenses to a very narrow prosecution here, and we lay them all out. But that is exactly the exercise here. And they will have tested it, mooted it, talked it back and forth to the highest levels within the department in order to pressure test it and make sure that it will hold up, and that whatever defenses there are, they believe they can successfully rebut in front of a jury.
Charles, I'm very interested in this deprivation of rights under the color of law. It's the one that those of us who get our law training from Law & Order don't understand as well. What does that mean?
What it is basically saying that you used your authority as the President of the United States to essentially deprive or undermine the American vote. So every one of us has an opportunity to have our votes counted, to have our votes mean something. But by engaging in this process and by doing so as the president, at the time that you were still president, you sought to undermine one of the most core fundamental principles of American democracy, which is we all have a vote and our vote counts. And so from a narrative perspective, I think that it's probably one of the most serious charges that we've seen, because it, above anything else, speaks to the very core about what we're talking about with Donald Trump's involvement with January 6th, and not just the obstruction of the transfer of power, but again, trying to invalidate the vote of American people.
And again, it sounds like the one that will capture the imagination, right? Witness tampering is what it is, but it sounds like something that you lawyers and law enforcement need to worry about. This one sounds like, wait a second, this is me. You might have tampered with my rights, and even if it wasn't my vote that wasn't counted, once you start undermining votes in a democracy like ours, you're undermining. When you undermine one, you undermine them all.
I agree. I think it's the one that's the most trenchant, the most salient, the one that will actually reach down and grab the jurors where they live.
Right.
I mean, conspiracy to defraud the United States, I think, is another one, but that's kind of all of us. This one will make each juror who is sitting there fulfilling their civic duty.
In that moment, that's what they're doing.
In that moment, they're going to feel all the more invested with a sense of how important this charge is that they are deliberating.
And that's so important, because ultimately this is going to come down to competing narratives. That's what all trials do. It's going to be a story of, oh, I was just fighting for an election that I thought was stolen from me, versus, no, what you were trying to do is you were trying to invalidate American democracy and take away people's votes. And that's why this is so important.
That's the distinction. I definitely want you two near me while we're covering this trial. Thank you to both of you, Danya Perry and Charles Coleman.